Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 29th of January of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first update is the most important update is about Zaluzhny, Valery Zaluzhny, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine. According to information we have, he was dismissed today. At least by the time I start making this video, it was somewhere at 9 p.m. of the local time of Moscow time. Zaluzhny was dismissed, and then we got a lot of very interesting details and updates, because you know that there is a balagan in Ukraine and mass in Ukrainian policy. For example, a few minutes after we got the first update about the fact that Zaluzhny was dismissed, we got update from different resources who confirmed that information, and some sources report that information was confirmed. Zelensky removed Chief Commissar Zaluzhny. Today is a holiday in Moscow. So most of the Western people, journalists in countries and authorities think that dismissal of Zaluzhny is a holiday in Moscow. And if you ask my opinion, I don't agree with this. Zaluzhny was, he's been, let's say, general commander-in-chief for around 2 years, and he haven't managed to achieve anything for Ukraine. And if we compare Zaluzhny with, let's say, Gerasimov, the head of Russian army, so we see completely different situation. Gerasimov, since the beginning of the special military operation, he managed to establish control over Mariupol, Severodonetsk, Bakhmut. He managed to start the special military operation and to establish control over Kherson. So he made a lot. And when talking about Zaluzhny, there was just one successful operation from his, two successful operations from his side, is the Kupyansk Kharkiv counteroffensive and Kherson operation. But when talking about Kherson, the Russians took a decision to retreat and to withdraw their positions, and I'm not sure that Zaluzhny, if he started that offensive operation in Kherson, could win or something like this. So basically he has just one successful operation implemented by him and two successful cases just during his commander-in-chief position. But anyway, this is not the end. Later we got update from the Minister of Defense that update about Zaluzhny was fake and something like this. At the same time, we got update that Zaluzhny was fired, and Budanov, the head of Ukrainian intelligence, would replace him. And later, probably the latest update, right before I start making the video, was that Zaluzhny was proposed to be ambassador somewhere in maybe the United States of America or maybe in Canada. I don't know details about where exactly he was proposed to be ambassador, but Zaluzhny refused. But regarding his refusal, he continued packing his things in the main office and something like this. So he started packing his photos, his deals, his pencils, his presents he got from different people, but he refused to be an ambassador. I think that he will retire. I believe that he will not, maybe he's going to start political career, because as we know, this is the reason why, the main reason why Zelensky took a decision to dismiss Zaluzhny, because Zaluzhny played political games, and Zelensky thought that Zaluzhny might be a candidate for president elections. So we'll see what is going to be next. But if you ask my opinion, I believe that Zaluzhny was dismissed because during the January, the Ukrainians were defeated in Rabotino, in Vremivka tactical bridge, had problems in Novomikhailivka. The Ukrainians almost lost the battle for Avdiivka. The Ukrainians almost lost everything they won during the counter-offensive operation in Bakhmut. The Ukrainians have problems in Terny, the Russians attacking, and now the Ukrainians got the breakthrough in the vicinity of Kislovka, Katarlyovka, Krakhmalna. Now let's move to the situation on the ground, because we have a lot of details and updates in this area as well. First, we're going to start about Kupyansk. Of course, we haven't received anything about Sinkovka. The Russians continue improving their positions along the forest on the northern part of the area, trying to bypass the Ukrainian defense belt on the northwest. When talking about Kislovka Kotlarovka, today we got the official confirmation of the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation. The Russians are saying that they managed to establish complete control over Tabaevka, and so we have already adjusted the map, because we have the Ministry of Defense report first of all, and also we have some geolocations from on the ground which we discussed yesterday. Also other different mappers updated their map showing this territory under Russian control. Other Russian sources reported that the Russians managed to establish control not over Tabaevka but to cross a small river in this area, and Pishana, the river has the name Pishana, and to establish control over the hills on, let's say, Ukrainian bank of Pishana river. So according to some sources, this small foothold is also under Russian control, which is very important because from this area the Russians can continue offensive operation. But as we discussed in the previous video, the Russians captured the first defense belt, but the main defense belt of this territory goes from this stronghold to the south in direction of Pishana. So when talking about this defense belt, the Russians still haven't started any offensive operation on this direction. Other sources reported that the Russians managed to establish control over Berestove, but yet we haven't received even a single geolocated confirmation of that. We haven't received any updates about the battle for Kislyovka-Kotlyarowka. So let's wait. Obviously, the situation is going to develop very funny, and if it's true that Zaluzhny took a decision to, let's say, leave his position, or he was dismissed, and if he's going to start political career, obviously tomorrow we're going to start receiving more updates from him, and he will start fighting with Zelensky, and he will start requiring and demanding him to start the president elections, which obviously Zelensky will lose. And now we are moving further to the south in direction of Liman area. We continue receiving a lot of updates from this territory, more updates, more things. The Russians continue their offensive operation, trying to storm the forest that lays in front of Yampolovka. Today we got another geolocated video of Russian attack. This one, the Russians were using significant number of armored vehicles, tanks and so on, but most of them were destroyed. Some of them were destroyed. Basically the abandoned one, Russians managed to land their infantry and they started clearing this territory. Furthermore, some mappers have already updated their maps showing additional Russian progress in the same area. So as we understand, based on the geolocations, the main Russian purpose was to attack this part of the forest from two directions. The first one went along this tree line, the second one along this one, and the main goal of the Russian forces was to establish control over this part of the forest, to dig in deeper, to repel Ukrainian counterattacks, and after that from this area to continue development of offensive operation in direction of Yampolovka. And this operation, if this operation was successful or is successful, this will allow the Russians to cut this territory into at least two small parts and to handle with every single one separately. But for now, we still haven't received any updates. Interesting detail we got from the village by the name of Zarechna. On this, for example, video, we can see the Russian Lancet strike, and this is probably the first Lancet strike in this area for a very long period of time. This means that, what does it mean? First of all, the Ukrainians have redeployed to Zherebets River as many as possible artillery forces with the purpose to slow down the Russians and to help defenders in Yampolovka, Terny direction, and which, of course, means that the Russians will concentrate significant number of Lancet operators, and obviously the next few days we're going to receive significant number of Lancet strikes and significant number of destroyed Ukrainian artillery forces. So the situation in Terny continue develops not in Ukrainian favor. When talking about Belogorovka area and Serebryanka area, we haven't received a lot of updates, just a few artillery strikes, multi-launch rocket strikes against the forest part under Ukraine control, which confirms the further Russian progress to Seversky Donetsk River. And when talking about Belogorovka itself, with the Russian sources, especially in Bakhmut, published the video of FPV drone strikes against the Ukrainian forces on the hill, which means that the Russians are still there. They still haven't managed to bypass the hill. There are still a lot of work to do. The Ukrainians during the previous years created significant number of fortifications and strongholds, and of course it requires a lot of time to penetrate and to destroy these strongholds. After that, the Russians will be able to continue movements further in the central part of the village. When talking about Sivers's direction, we haven't received anything, just artillery bombings of Ukrainian positions in the western part of Sporne, which probably means that soon the Russians will renew their attempts to attack on this direction, but for now, no changes on the ground. Now we are moving to Bogdanovka area, Bakhmut, Artyomovsk direction. As you can see, we have lots of very interesting geolocations, and first we're going to start with Bogdanovka. The Russians continue publishing FPV drone strikes in the central part of the village, and it's a very important question. You might ask yourself, or at least me, when the Russians are going to bypass the central part of Bogdanovka, because for the previous 3 weeks we've been talking just about the central part of Bogdanovka, and that the Russians are storming the central part of Bogdanovka. And it's very interesting when the Russians are going to bypass, and probably today by a small analysis we can receive an answer to this question. But to understand this, first we need to increase the numbers of updates. So once again, pay attention to the area of Russian FPV drone strikes. This is the central part of Bogdanovka. But if we increase the number of updates since the beginning of January, it will give us and help us to understand what the Russians are doing. So if we take a look at this map, you're going to see this is the beginning of Russian FPV drone strikes, and then they're moving one building by another. One strike, the second, another strike, another strike, to be more precise, another building, another stronghold, another stronghold, another stronghold. And now the Russians are attacking, according to the latest geolocations, this territory. So basically, as a result of FPV drone strikes, the Russians managed to bypass this central part of Bogdanovka. So as you can see, they're just moving step by step, and from the other side, the Ukrainians are doing the same. First, the Ukrainians were controlling, let's say, this building, but with FPV drones, the Russians destroyed the building. Then the Ukrainians move further, move back, and they captured another building. Not captured, but they established position over another building. Then the Russians destroyed this building as well, and the Ukrainians moved further back, and that was the Ukrainian tactic. They were moving slowly step by step, and the Russians were hunting them with FPV drones and destroying their new positions. So as you can see, according to this geolocation, the Russians are currently trying to clear this territory, and very likely that as a result of this clearing operation, the Russians managed to establish additional control over additional lines and buildings in the central part Bogdanovka as well. So just based on this step-by-step, let's say, FPV drone movements from the Russian side. But yet we haven't received any geolocate confirmation of Russian presence, at least in this part of the village. But anyway, the progress, we can see the progress, right? And now we're moving to Ivanovska area. As you can see, we haven't received anything from this direction, no updates about the Russian progress inside of the village. When talking about Klishchevka, the Russians published few videos of FPV drone strikes against the Ukrainian forces in this part of Klishchevka. The Ukrainian, let's say, fortifications in the tree lines were under very heavy fire, and we can use the same logic for in this area as we used in Bogdanovka, just to follow the Russian focus. At the beginning of January, mainly the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions on this side of the road. Let's say, what is the road between Ivanovska and Klishchevka? You see the Russian focus of FPV drones, and now the Russians are bombing this territory, which confirms that the Russians are moving focus, and probably with the movements of focus, the Russians are moving their edge positions and edge forces. So very likely that the Russians have some progress on the 215.7 hill as well. Another important thing I would like to discuss with you, the more Lancet strikes in this area. This is not Lancet, this is multi-launch rocket system bombing of Ukrainian positions along canal. The Russians were bombing supply roads that Ukrainians were using to support their forces in Klishchevka. But the most important are update about Lancet strikes. And for example, today some Russian channels published some statistic about the use of this type of weapon, and since the beginning of the special military operation, there were today on the 29th of January, the Russians published 1,000th video of Lancet strike against the Ukrainian armored vehicles, tanks and artillery. Since the beginning of the special military operation, today they were published 1,000th video of Lancet strike. Basically, this is probably the game changer weapon during the special military operation. The Ukrainians, for 2 years of special military operation, haven't managed to create their own analog or something like this. And to tell the truth, there were a lot of time for this, but somehow they couldn't find a better solution or the same solution. And if we increase the numbers of updates just on Bakhmut direction since the beginning of January, we can calculate the number of Lancet strikes that took place in this area. Significant number. I tried to count, and there were more than 50 strikes with Lancet just since the beginning of these months, which means that around 50 artillery systems, tank systems, mortar positions, supply machines, supply roads were destroyed by the Russians just for January, and this caused significant, let's say, pressure on Ukrainian positions in the vicinity of Ivanovska, Chasov Yar, Bogdanovka, and so on. Because if we move our focus to, let's say, Bakhmut itself, then you're gonna see that there are almost no geolocations with artillery strikes, and there are almost just a few, maybe 10 geolocations of Ukrainian FPV drone strikes, and this is exactly the results of work of Russian Lancet, because every single artillery system that was destroyed by Lancet should have attacked the Russian positions somewhere in Bakhmut or in this area. So the Russians by Lancet, so Lancet is the superiority weapon, the weapon that can establish complete superiority and artillery superiority and any type of superiorities, and we see that this probably the game changer and the battle changer, at least on this direction. So we'll see what is going to be next, but obviously the Russians will continue their movements. Now we're moving to Avdiivka area, and we got a lot of very interesting details from this territory as well. And the most important are coming from the southern part. The Russian forces published the video of their ground operation when they were storming the Ukrainian positions a little bit to the west, to the north from industrial area. On this video, for example, we can see the Russian squads, the Russian troopers moving from one tree to another, from one position to another. They were under protection and under control of commanders with FPV drones. They were controlling and giving advices and orders where to move, where to attack. And as a result of this attack, we have geolocated confirmation. The Russians managed to establish control over 3 more strongholds in this area. From this level of zoom, we can see them. This is the first stronghold, this is the second one, and this is the third one. So according to this geolocation, as a result of Russian offensive operation, the Russians at least managed to establish control over something like this. And we understand that the main purpose of this attack is to move further, of course, for the Russians, and to cut the Ukrainian forces that located in the filtration station. So this is filtration station, and the Russians just want to cut this area from the mainland and to force the Ukrainians, let's say, to step back from this territory, to withdraw their positions, to retreat towards the mainland and the main part of Avdiivka. So something like this. Furthermore, we have geolocation from the northern part of the same area. On this video, for example, we can see how the Russian FPV drones were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces on this side of filtration station, which also means that the Russians have some plans to attack the same area from the north. And FPV drones, as we know, is the first stage of any offensive operation, and that video that we just watched means that the Russians maybe have already reached this area, or in the very near future will start movement, let's say, along this area, along this road, along this, let's say, side of the road N20, with the same purpose, to cut filtration station and of course to establish control over this forest on the eastern flank of Avdiivka area. When talking about Sobornaya, Chernyshevskaya, Sportivnaya Street, Ukrainians still haven't managed to return control. All attacks were repelled by the Russians. We got more videos of FAPs. The main forces, the main reinforcements always are comes from chemical plants. The Russians know the supply roads. The Russians know where to attack, how to slow down the Ukrainians, because this is not a very big area. Everything is under complete FPV and reconnaissance drone control, so the Ukrainians don't have chances to regain positions on the south. Furthermore, Zaluzhny, if Zaluzhny was dismissed, this might be another thing that will ruin any plans for further, let's say, game in the south of Avdiivka. On this video, for example, we can see how the terrain was, how the situation was changed since November till the late January. So as you can see, this area is under complete Russian fire control, or maybe Ukrainian fire control as well. Now we are moving further to the south in Donetsk, the city of Donetsk. We have once again the statistic about the use of Lancet. 1,000 cases since the beginning of the special military operation were geolocated. And when talking about Donetsk, the Ukrainians once again bombed this territory with a multi-launch rocket system, significant number among civilians and so on. Now we are moving to South Donetsk. We have significant number of updates. The Russians continue bombing the Ukrainian positions in the vicinity of Georgievka. Just a day ago we were talking that the Russian main focus in this area is located, artillery focus in this square, and obviously the Russians are trying to collapse the Ukrainian defense in this area to destroy the strongholds. There are as you can see, there is a rich network of the fortifications. If the Russians are able to collapse, then they're gonna receive operational space, and from this area they can attack. The Russians can attack in any direction, including Georgievka, The Russians from these positions can attack Maximilianovka, the Russians can attack Konstantinovka and Katerinovka, Antonovka, so this is going to be disaster. When talking about Novomikhailivka itself, today we got additional updates about further Russian progress on this direction as well. We have, for the first time, we have geolocated confirmation of Russian control over Zverinets. We have a video of that. It's a very difficult video. We will not publish due to casualties and dead bodies and many other things, so that's why we will not publish this video. But according to information we have now, Zverinets is under complete Russian control. Different mappers have already updated their maps showing additional progress to the southwest of Zverinets, and this is very important updates. We still haven't received any geolocate confirmations, but according to those mappers, the Russians established control over this territory as well. And this is very important because if it's true, then the Russians established control over this stronghold, one of the biggest and one of the most important and biggest strongholds in this area. I'll remind you that the northern defense of Novomikhailivka relied on 4 defense belt: Zverinets, this one, and this one. 4 defense. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 strongholds. And as you can see, according to confirmed and unconfirmed reports, the Russians managed to establish control over 50% of the base of northern Novomikhailivka defense. And now the Russians got as close as possible to the next 3rd defense belt, and if the Russians are able to capture this territory, then the days of Novomikhailivka will be numbered, because this defense belt, the main purpose of this defense belt is not to, let's say, protect Novomikhailivka from the north. Mainly, the main purpose of this defense belt is not to allow the Russians to attack Pobeda from the southeast, so like to prevent this attack. So this is the main purpose. So there is this stronghold plays no role in the battle for Novomikhailivka. And anyway, the Russians are getting closer and closer, and soon we're going to continue receiving, or the news about Novomikhailivka will start receiving with a significant number. And now we're moving further to a few more things about Donetsk direction. We have video of more strikes in Myrnograd, the main logistic hub of Ukrainian forces, and as you can see, another building, another temporary position of Ukrainian forces was destroyed. Now we are moving to the Vremyivka tactical bridgehead, and we have significant number of updates. The Russian sources published lots of videos of their attack in this area, and we have most of them were geolocated. Positions are clear, and as a result of offensive operation that the Russians conducted those days, probably yesterday, maybe the day before yesterday, or maybe today, we don't have the correct date. The Russians were attacking to the north from Priyutina, and as a result of that attack, the Russians managed to establish control over this territory. We will adjust the map before the next video, but this is of course significant progress of the Russian forces, and now the Ukrainians have a very big crisis on this direction, because now the Russians can concentrate forces here, and they have possibility to attack in many directions. The Russians can attack Livadna, the Russians can attack to the north in Novodaryevka, the Russians can attack from the same area in direction of Rovnopol, and of course the Russians can continue pressure in direction of Staromayorska. And they need to keep for this, let's say, 5,000 soldiers. And the Ukrainians from their side at the same time need to keep their forces in the same cities, in the same villages, and they need much more forces to be on the safe side, and because if, let's say, Ukrainians keep their forces in Staromayorsk and the Russians attack, let's say, Novodaryevka, of course they're going to need time to redeploy tactical or operational reserves. So this is the situation. Obviously, the Russians will try to improve their position further. When talking about Rabotina, we haven't received any updates. There are a few geolocated FPV drone strikes without any changes on the ground. The same story we can say about Kherson direction. The Russians continue using FABs. A significant number of geolocated strikes took place, published during the previous 24 hours. The Russians continue destroying the concentration of Ukrainian forces, trying to force them to step back further inside of the mainland of Kherson direction. But as I understand, the Ukrainians are not going to do this. Very difficult to understand what are their plans, because there were no updates about any activity from the Ukrainian side in Krinky, or at least in what left from Krinky, just few geolocated FPV drone strikes against the Russian positions. The Russians are not entering the gray zone, either the Ukrainians are not controlling this territory as well. So the situation, as I understand, fits everyone's requirements. The the front line is stable without any changes on the ground. The Russians also were bombing Kherson, the temporary positions, evacuation zones, supply roads, ammo depots and warehouses. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.